the galaxy had a name for peace. They called it Velkara, a word borrowed from the oldest alien tongue in the known universe, spoken first by the Dravkai, a species so ancient that their bones had turned to starlight long before humans ever crawled out of the ocean. Velkara meant, roughly translated, the quiet that lasts forever. It was the kind of peace that powerful civilizations enforced not with kindness, but with the simple, undeniable weight of dominance. And for 900 years the Galactic Throne had maintained that peace. The Galactic Throne was not a single government. It was not a democracy, not a republic, not a federation in the way humans once imagined such things. It was a coalition of 7 species, the most advanced, the most powerful, the most feared civilizations in the Milky Way, bound together by a treaty older than most star systems humanity had ever mapped. The 7 species were the Dravkai, the Salvith, the Emerwenin, the Kilari, the Vok, the Tesheri, and the Orin. Each one brought something to the throne. The Dravkai brought ancient wisdom. The Salvith brought military might. The Emerwenin brought technology. The Kilari brought diplomacy. The Vok brought resources. The Tesheri brought intelligence networks. And the Orin, small, quiet, and deeply underestimated, brought something no one ever talked about openly. They brought memory. Every agreement, every betrayal, every whispered deal made in the dark corners of space, the Orin remembered it all. Together, these 7 species ran the galaxy like a machine. A cold, efficient, deeply unfair machine, but a machine nonetheless. And machines by their nature do not like surprises. Humanity had been a surprise from the very beginning. When humans first made contact with the Galactic Throne 43 years ago, the reaction across the 7 species had been something between amusement and mild disgust. Humans were small. Their ships were primitive. Their weapons were laughable. Their diplomacy was clumsy and loud and embarrassingly emotional. The Kilari ambassador at the time, a tall, silver-skinned being named Thessaly Vor, had reportedly described humanity's first diplomatic transmission as the audio equivalent of a wounded animal. The throne had done what it always did with primitive species. It had issued a classification. Humanity was designated Class 4, pre-integration, limited threat, observation status. In plain language, that meant humans were not dangerous enough to destroy, not useful enough to recruit, and not interesting enough to study closely. They were simply watched, monitored, occasionally nudged in directions that suited the throne's interests. Trade agreements were offered, but carefully structured so that humans always received slightly less than they gave. Technology sharing was permitted, but only the kind that kept humans dependent rather than self-sufficient. Resources were allocated, but never enough to allow real growth. It was a system designed to keep humanity exactly where the throne wanted it, small, manageable, and grateful. For 38 years it worked. Commander Elena Voss sat in the briefing room of Earth's United Space Command headquarters in Colorado Springs and stared at the report on her tablet with the kind of stillness that only came from practice. She had learned, over 22 years of service, to keep her face neutral when reading things that made her stomach drop. The report was flagged Level Omega, the highest classification in the United Space Command System, a level most officers spend entire careers never seeing. Level Omega meant the information in this file, if it reached the wrong ears, could change the course of human history. Elena set her tablet down. She folded her hands on the table. She breathed. "How long?" she asked. Across the table, General Marcus Hale, a broad-shouldered man with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much, leaned back in his chair and said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "Officially 5 years. Unofficially, the program started 19 years ago." Elena looked up at him. 19 years. "Before either of us had any idea," Hale said. "Before the throne's latest round of restrictions. Before they cut off our access to deep space navigation data. Before they reclassified our outer colonies as restricted zones." He paused. "Someone in this building, or somewhere above this building, saw all of that coming a long time ago." Elena looked at the tablet again. On the screen, partially visible beneath her folded hands, were the words she was still processing. Project Caro, full operational status confirmed. "Where is it now?" she asked. Hale smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had been carrying a secret so long that finally saying it out loud felt almost violent. "That's the beautiful part," he said. "No one knows. Not even us." "Not exactly." Elena stared at him. "The ship navigates autonomously," Hale continued. "It chose its own patrol route 6 months ago and went dark. Full communications blackout. No transponder signal. No gravimetric wake. Nothing. As far as the throne's sensor networks are concerned, it does not exist." "And when it comes back online?" Elena asked. Hale looked at the ceiling. That depends, he said, on whether it decides to. Outside the windows of the briefing room, Colorado Springs was dark. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. The stars above the mountains were bright and cold and very far away. Elena Voss looked at them for a long moment. She thought about the throne. She thought about 38 years of being managed and limited and quietly humiliated on the galactic stage. She thought about the outer colonies, human settlements on worlds the throne had unilaterally decided humans weren't allowed to visit anymore, citing resource protection protocols that conveniently only ever applied to humanity. She thought about what it meant that someone 19 years ago had started building something in secret. Something the throne did not know about. Something called Caro. She picked up her tablet. She read the report again, slowly from the beginning. And as she read, something shifted in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. Not hope exactly. Something harder than hope. Something that had edges. She read about the ship's dimensions and felt her breath catch. She read about its propulsion system and stopped breathing entirely for a moment. She read about its weapons array and had to set the tablet down again and press her hands flat against the cool surface of the table. "Marcus," she said quietly. "Yeah," Hale said. "This changes everything." "Yes," he said. "It does." Neither of them said anything else for a long time. The stars outside the window didn't move. But something in the room had shifted. The air, the weight of the dark, the quiet understanding that the galaxy was about to learn something new about the species it had spent 38 years treating like an afterthought. Somewhere out in the deep dark between stars, a ship was moving. No one could see it. No one could track it. No one could stop it. And it was already on its way. The Galactic Throne's central governing body met every 30 standard days aboard the Station of Seven Voices, a massive orbital platform positioned at the exact gravitational center of the Throne's territorial claims, a point in space that the Orin had calculated centuries ago and declared sacred. The station was enormous by any measure. It was 12 kilometers long, shaped like a curved blade, and covered in the architecture of 7 different civilizations layered on top of each other over 9 centuries of continuous construction and renovation. On the day that would later be recorded in Throne history as the day of first silence, the session had been routine. Grand Arbiter Selvath, a Salvath tall and deep blue, with 4 arms and a face that radiated the particular kind of authority that came from never having been told no, called the session to order at precisely the appointed hour. The 7 representatives took their seats around the circular table. Holographic star maps rotated slowly above them. The agenda was displayed in 7 languages simultaneously. First item, trade route adjustments in the Orion Arm. Second item, the Teshari's latest intelligence report on minor species activity. Third item, human colony compliance review. The third item was where it always got slightly interesting, in the way that a minor irritant is briefly interesting before being dealt with. The human compliance review had been a standing agenda item for 11 years, ever since humanity had begun making what the Throne called unauthorized resource development attempts, in the Kepler Belt, a stretch of asteroid-rich space that the Throne had claimed as a protected navigation corridor despite the fact that it was 200 light-years from any Throne member world. Kilari Representative Tharavel, slim, pale gold with eyes like polished copper, pulled up the latest data and began reading. Human outer colony activity remains within acceptable parameters. Minor variance detected in the Kepler survey station readings, appears to be standard equipment drift. No action recommended. Agreed, said Emerwinin Representative Kaidats, a being that looked vaguely like a storm cloud given a body, dark and crackling at the edges. Humans remain classified Class 4. No change in status. The Teshari would like to note, said a soft voice, Teshari Representative Nis, barely visible at the edge of the table, small and pale and wrapped in overlapping layers of translucent fabric, that our monitoring of human communications has detected some irregularities over the past few years. What kind of irregularities? Arbiter Selvath asked, not particularly interested. Encrypted traffic, Nis said. Deep layer encryption. The kind that, she paused. The kind we cannot fully read. A brief silence fell around the table. It was the kind of silence that had texture, a slight stiffening of postures, a subtle adjustment of attention. Cannot fully read? Kaidat said. Humans don't have encryption architecture capable of blocking Teshari analysis protocols. They didn't, Nis said. 3 years ago they did not. The encryption we are currently seeing did not exist in human systems 3 years ago. Another silence. Longer this time. You're saying they developed it themselves? Tharavel asked. I am saying, Nis replied carefully, that it did not come from any technology we shared with them. Which means either they developed it independently or... Or someone gave it to them, Selvath said. Yes. The arbiter looked around the table. Has anyone shared advanced cryptographic architecture with humanity without authorization? 6 sets of alien eyes looked at each other. 6 silent denials. Selvath settled back into his seat. Then they developed it themselves. He said it in the tone of someone filing away a mildly surprising fact. Not alarmed, not worried, simply noting it. Increase monitoring. Double the frequency of compliance checks. If there is unusual activity, I want to know within one standard cycle. As you wish, Nis said. The session continued. The compliance review ended. The star maps rotated. The station of 7 voices hummed along in its ancient orbit, confident and enormous and utterly certain of its own permanence. No one on the station, not one of the 7 representatives, not one of the thousands of staff members and analysts and guards, knew that at that exact moment 47 light-years away, in a region of space the throne sensors swept routinely every 72 hours and found reliably empty, something was moving. It was large. It was fast. And it was invisible. The man who had built it was named Dr. James Okafor. He was 61 years old, Nigerian-American, born in Lagos, raised in Houston, educated at MIT and then at a university that didn't officially exist on any public record. He was not a military man. He had never worn a uniform. He had spent his entire adult life doing one thing: solving problems that other people had decided were impossible. He was currently sitting in a chair that was bolted to the floor of a room that was bolted to a ship that was currently traveling at a velocity that had no official name yet, because the mathematics required to describe it hadn't been fully published, because publishing them would have told the throne that humanity had quietly leapfrogged every propulsion technology the 7 species had spent centuries developing. The room around James Okafor was plain. Gray walls. 1 screen. 1 coffee cup, currently empty. A photo of his daughter, printed on actual paper, pinned above the screen with a piece of tape. He was looking at the photo when Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park walked in. Sarah was 34, Korean-American, sharp in the way that good engineers are sharp, precise, economical, not given to unnecessary words. She had been James's first recruit to Project Caro, brought in 12 years ago when she was 22 and had just published a theoretical paper on adaptive hull geometry that had made James sit up so fast he'd spilled his coffee. She had never regretted coming. She had occasionally wondered if she was insane for staying. We're 42 hours out from the primary approach vector, she said, sitting down across from him. Good, James said. He looked away from his daughter's photo. How's the crew? Ready, Sarah said. Nervous but ready. Captain Torres ran 2 more simulation drills this morning. Everyone knows their position. She paused. James. Are we sure about this? He looked at her. Define sure. Are we sure the timing is right? Are we sure they won't just blow us out of the sky? I was going to say, respond disproportionately, but yes. James smiled. It was a tired smile, the kind worn by people who have been worrying for a very long time. No, he said honestly. I'm not sure. I've never been sure. But I know this, if we wait any longer, the outer colonies lose their last supply corridor. 40,000 people, Sarah. 40,000 humans on those colony worlds, cut off, running out of food and medicine and water recycling components, because the throne decided that the space between them and us needed to be a protected navigation zone. His voice stayed even but his eyes didn't. We're not doing this to start a war. We're doing this to make sure they know that starting one would cost them something. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the ship is ready. The crew is ready. She met his eyes. I'm ready. James Okafor nodded. He looked at his daughter's photo one more time. She was 8 years old in the picture. She was 27 now, living on one of the outer colonies, one of the ones being cut off. He stood up. Then let's go, he said, and introduce ourselves properly. Her name was the UES Caro. United Earth Ship Caro. Named not after a word from any alien language, not after any great general or ancient myth, but after a small word in an old dialect of Igbo spoken in southeastern Nigeria, a word that meant, roughly, carry forward. James Okafor had chosen it himself. He had chosen it because the ship was not built to destroy. It was built to carry something forward. A message, an idea, a line drawn in the dark between stars that said, we are still here and we are not what you thought we were. The UES Caro was, by any reasonable measure, a warship. But it was a warship the way a human fist is a weapon. Not primarily built for violence but capable of it in a way that made very clear what it would cost to push too far. She was 812 meters long. That alone would have caused alarm in throne military circles, since the largest human vessel on record, according to Throne intelligence files, which were thorough but, as it turned out, not thorough enough, was a supply freighter measuring 260 meters. The Caro was more than 3 times that size, and she carried none of the bulk or awkwardness of a freighter. She was lean. She was angular. She was built in the tradition of human warships going back centuries, a design philosophy that prioritized speed, forward firepower, and the psychological impact of a silhouette that made it immediately viscerally clear that this object was made for one purpose. Her hull was composed of a material that Sarah Park had spent 6 years developing and that had no name yet in any language, a composite that absorbed electromagnetic radiation across nearly every spectrum the Throne's sensors used, which was why their sensors had never once, in the 3 years since the Caro first went active, detected her presence. She was, to the Throne's most sophisticated monitoring network, simply not there. Her engines were a different matter entirely. The propulsion system of the UES Caro was James Okafor's masterpiece, the thing he had dedicated 20 years to, the thing that had required him to quietly rewrite 4 fundamental assumptions of physics that the Throne's science community had considered settled for centuries. He called it the folded drive. The MRNN, who were the galaxy's acknowledged leaders in propulsion technology, used a system called phase displacement. It bent space slightly ahead of a ship, reducing effective distance. It was fast. It was reliable. It was the gold standard of FTL travel in the known galaxy. The folded drive did not bend space. It folded it. The difference between bending a piece of paper and folding it, between reducing the distance and temporarily eliminating it. The result was not merely faster travel. It was travel that left no gravimetric signature, no tachyon wake, no subspace distortion that any existing sensor network was calibrated to detect, because those sensor networks had been built to find phase displacement signatures, and the Caro was not using phase displacement. She was using something the galaxy had never seen before. Captain Ava Torres stood on the Caro's bridge and watched the stars. She was 47 years old, Mexican-American, born in Guadalajara, raised in San Antonio, career military with 23 years of service in the United Space Command. She had flown convoy escorts through the Kepler belt. She had been present at the diplomatic meeting where the Throne officially closed the outer colony supply corridors, sitting in the 3rd row of the human delegation, watching Kilari Ambassador Tharavel deliver the decision with the same detached pleasantness someone might use to describe a weather forecast. She had sat very still through that meeting. She had gone back to her quarters afterward and spent 40 minutes doing breathing exercises she'd learned from a therapist in San Antonio. She had volunteered for Project Caro 3 days later. "Captain," said Lieutenant David Chin from the navigation console, "we are 26 hours from the approach coordinates. Folded drive nominal. All systems green." "Thank you, Lieutenant," Torres said. She kept her voice even and her posture straight. 26 hours. 26 hours until they dropped out of fold space at a location that would put them, according to James Okafor's calculations, approximately 12,000 kilometers from the station of 7 Voices. Close enough to be unmistakable, far enough to be non-threatening. Close enough to say here we are. Far enough to say we choose to be peaceful. For now. The bridge crew was 17 people. They were the best 17 people Torres had ever worked with, handpicked over 5 years, trained under conditions of absolute secrecy, briefed fully only 6 months ago when the Caro went operational. Most of them had family on the outer colonies. Most of them had some personal version of the reason Torres had for being here. Chief Engineer Rosa Delgado, mid-40s Puerto Rican American, built like someone who had spent decades wrestling with machine problems and winning, looked up from her station. "Captain, hull integrity is perfect. The absorption matrix is performing above projected parameters. We are completely invisible. Let's make sure it stays that way for another 26 hours, Torres said. "Yes, ma'am." Torres turned back to the stars. Somewhere ahead, invisible across the fold, was the station of 7 Voices. She thought about the beings inside it. The Arbiter. The 7 representatives. The thousands of staff members who ran the machinery of galactic governance with such complete confidence in their own permanence. She thought about what their faces were going to look like. She allowed herself one small, quiet smile. Then she went back to work. It started with an anomaly. It always starts with an anomaly. In every record of every great historical surprise, military, political, scientific, there was always a moment, often overlooked at the time, when something small and strange appeared at the edge of what was known and was briefly noticed before being dismissed. The throne had had many such moments in the past few centuries. Most of them had been nothing. Some of them had been the first whispers of things that later changed everything. This one was the second kind. Sensor Analyst 3rd Grade Venerai, a young Tess Sherry barely 2 years out of the academy, assigned to the station of 7 Voices Passive Monitoring Array, was doing what sensor analysts did during quiet shifts, watching numbers. The numbers were always the same. The space around the station of 7 Voices was the most thoroughly monitored region in the galaxy. 17 overlapping sensor grids, each using different detection methodologies, each calibrated to catch anything from a stealth probe the size of a human fist to a rogue asteroid traveling at non-standard velocity. At 0347 station time, one of VenRI's secondary readout screens showed a very brief, very faint flicker in the gravimetric baseline. It lasted 0.3 seconds. Then it was gone. VenRI stared at the screen. She ran the standard diagnostic. The diagnostic came back clean. She ran it again. Still clean. The gravimetric baseline was stable. The flicker was not repeating. The 17 sensor grids all agreed that the space around the station was exactly as it had always been, empty, monitored, safe. She filed a standard anomaly report, flagged it low priority, and went back to watching her numbers. The anomaly report joined 1,142 other low-priority anomaly reports generated that shift by the station's sensor network. It was routed to a review queue that was processed once every 48 hours. It would never be processed. Because 41 minutes after VenRI filed her report, the UES Caro came out of fold space. There was no warning. That was the thing that people kept coming back to afterward when they tried to make sense of it. There was no warning because there was no approach signature. There was no warning because none of the 17 sensor grids had detected anything moving toward the station. There was no warning because the Caro's folded drive left no trace that any existing sensor was looking for. One moment, the space 12,000 kilometers off the station's port side was empty. The next moment, it was not. The UES Caro materialized out of nothing, not the shimmer and fold of phase displacement exit, not the flash of conventional FTL deceleration, but something completely different, something that looked on the station's visual feeds like the ship had always been there and the universe had simply forgotten to show it until now. 812 meters of angular, dark-hulled, unmistakably purposeful vessel, sitting in open space with her running lights on, bright, white, steady, making no attempt at concealment, making no attempt to hide at all. The alarms on the station of 7 Voices went off simultaneously across all 17 sensor grids. VenRI looked up from her console and saw the visual feed showing the object outside the station. Her first thought, she would tell this story for the rest of her life, was that someone had made a mistake in the display calibration. Because the thing on the feed looked like a weapon. A weapon the size of a small city district. A weapon sitting 12,000 kilometers away, completely unannounced, completely undetected, turning on its lights as casually as someone arriving at a dinner party. She hit the emergency alert. Within 90 seconds, the station of 7 Voices was at full battle stations. Within 4 minutes, all 7 throne representatives had been woken from their rest cycles and were being escorted to the command center. Within 7 minutes, Grand Arbiter Salvoth was standing in front of the largest display screen in the station, staring at the US Caro with an expression that, for the first time in his 200-year political career, could only be described as stunned. "What," he said very quietly, "is that?" Chief Intelligence Officer Hara, a Tesheri of considerable seniority, normally unflappable, stood beside him with a data pad in her hands and said the 4 words that would echo through throne history for decades: "Sir, it is human." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. 7 species of galactic authority, gathered around a display screen, staring at a ship they had not known existed, built by a species they had classified as Class 4, sitting 12,000 kilometers from their most secure and sacred station with its running lights on like it had every right to be there. Kilari Representative Tharavel was the first to find her voice. "That's impossible," she said. Not angry. Not threatening. Simply stating what she believed to be a fact. Humans do not have the technology to. "Representative," Hara said, "the ship appeared with no phase displacement signature. No gravimetric wake. No tachyon trace. Nothing in our sensor record suggests it traveled through space to reach that position. It is simply there. Fold space." MRYN Representative Kaidat said. The storm cloud being crackled slightly at his edges, the MRYN equivalent of alarm. They can't have developed fold space. The mathematics alone would take decades, said James Okafor's voice. Everyone froze. The voice was coming from the station's main communication array. Someone had opened a channel. Someone on that ship had sent a transmission on the standard throne diplomatic frequency, the one humanity had been given access to 38 years ago for routine trade discussions, the one used for minor species requests and compliance reports, and spoken 2 words through it in clear, unaccented galactic standard. Decades, the voice repeated. Yes, it took decades. We are patient people. Grand Arbiter Selvath looked at his communications officer. The officer nodded. The channel was confirmed, the source was confirmed, the signal was clean. Selvath straightened. He clasped two of his forehands behind his back. He employed every gram of 200 years of political experience to keep his voice level when he said, "This is Grand Arbiter Selvath of the Galactic Throne. You are in restricted space. Identify yourself." Pause. Brief. Comfortable. "This is Dr. James Okafor," the voice said. "Representing the United Earth government and the people of the outer human colonies. Grand Arbiter, I apologize for the unconventional arrival. I did consider calling ahead. But I was fairly certain that if I did, you would have sent ships to intercept us before we got here." Another pause. "We both know you cannot intercept us. We wanted you to know that you cannot. So, hello. We'd like to talk." The Galactic Throne had a protocol for first contact. It was a detailed, centuries-old diplomatic framework, developed over generations of encounters with new species, refined through hundreds of introductory meetings, war avoidance negotiations, and the occasional messy conflict that the protocol had failed to prevent. It was comprehensive. It was elegant. It covered everything from how to handle a species that communicated through bioluminescence to how to manage an encounter with a civilization that considered the concept of individual identity philosophically offensive. The protocol had never included a section on what to do when a species you had already classified, already categorized, already decided you understood, showed up at your front door in a ship that should not exist, using a propulsion technology you didn't have, with a calm, slightly amused voice asking to talk. Arbiter Selvath convened an emergency session in 40 minutes. That, in itself, was notable. Standard emergency session protocol required 2 hours of preparation. He cut it by half. The 7 representatives gathered in the command center rather than the formal session chamber, a choice that said more than Selvath intended it to. This was not a situation for formal settings. This was a situation for gathered, worried minds trying to figure out what they were dealing with. "Options," Selvath said without preamble. Vok Representative Jar, massive, gray-skinned, built like a geological formation, spoke first. "We destroy the ship. We have 47 combat vessels within response range. We can have 23 of them here within 3 hours. "No," said Tertiary Representative Nis immediately. Everyone looked at her. She was never immediate. "If that ship can travel without leaving a sensor signature, we have no way of knowing how many more of them there are. If we destroy this one and there are others we cannot detect, we will have started a war without knowing the enemy's full strength. That is strategically unacceptable." "She's right," Kaidat said, crackling. MRYNN concurs. "We need more information before any military response." "They asked to talk," the Ravel said. She had recovered her composure and was back to her characteristic smoothness. "We should talk. Talking costs us nothing and tells us more than any tactical analysis we could run from sensor data." "They are one ship," Jar growled. "They are one ship," Nis agreed, "that we did not know existed. Until 40 minutes ago, we believed we knew everything about human military capability. We were wrong. We do not yet know how wrong." Selvath had been listening. He made a decision. "We talk," he said. "We accept the channel. We engage in diplomatic exchange. We learn what we can." He looked at Hara. "Begin every available analysis of that vessel. Scan everything. I want every piece of data our sensors can pull." "Already running," Hara said. She hesitated. "Arbiter. Their hull absorption matrix is extraordinary. We're getting very little. Get what you can." "Yes, sir." She paused again. "There is one more thing." "What?" Hara's pale face was careful. "In the past 4 minutes, 3 separate tertiary monitoring stations in the outer zones have reported identical anomalies to the one our analyst filed 41 minutes ago. Same signature. Same duration. Same disappearance." The room went still. 3 locations? Nis said softly. 3 locations, Hara confirmed. Spread across sectors 7, 12, and 19. The 7 representatives looked at each other. Sectors 7, 12, and 19 together formed a rough triangle around throne-controlled space. 3 separate anomalies. 3 locations. 3 potential ships. Or more. "Accept the channel," Selvath said. His voice was still level. "It cost him something to keep it that way. And someone wake up every military commander we have." On the Caro, James Okafor sat in the ship's small communications room and waited. He knew they would accept. He had spent 19 years thinking through this moment from every angle, and he was as certain as he could be about the throne's calculus. They would not shoot first without more information, and getting more information meant talking to him. Captain Torres stood in the doorway. They've accepted the channel. Good. James straightened. He had put on a clean shirt for this. It felt important. Let's go to work. Torres gave him a look that combined respect with the particular wariness of someone who has been standing next to a controlled explosion for several years. Remember, she said, don't give them the exact numbers. I know. Don't tell them the range of the drive. I know, Ava. And for God's sake, don't tell them about the... I know, James said. I have been doing this for 19 years. I am very good at knowing what not to say. Torres almost smiled. Right. Go ahead then. She paused. James. Whatever happens, this is already historic. It was already historic when Rosa finished the hull, he said. Everything from here is just paperwork. He opened the channel. Grand Arbiter Selvath appeared on the screen, tall, deep blue, four-armed, ancient. He looked exactly as he did in the briefing files James had studied. Except for one thing. In the briefing files, the Arbiter looked like someone who had never in his life been uncertain of anything. Today, looking at James Okafor across 12,000 kilometers of open space, Selvath looked like a man who was very carefully managing a feeling he was not used to having. Dr. Okafor, the Arbiter said. Grand Arbiter, James replied. Thank you for speaking with me. You did not leave us a great deal of choice. I left you the choice to shoot, James said pleasantly. You chose not to. I appreciate that. Pause. You are trespassing in restricted space. You made it restricted, James said. Without our consent, without negotiation, and with the explicit effect of cutting our outer colonies off from supply lines. We never agreed that this space was yours to restrict. He said it without heat, without performance. Just as a statement of fact. We'd like to discuss that. Among other things. Selvath studied him for a moment. James let himself be studied. He had a good face for it, calm, open, showing nothing he didn't want to show. What other things? Selvath asked. Our classification, James said. Our trade agreements. Our access to navigation data. Our colony rights. He paused. And the terms under which we are prepared to remain peaceful members of the galactic community. The word terms landed in the silence of the command center like a stone into still water. No representative moved. Even JAR's geological stillness seemed to tighten. No Class 4 species had ever used that word in a session with the throne. Terms. As if they were equals. As if they had something to offer, or withhold. James Okafor waited. And for the first time in 900 years of the Galactic Throne's existence, the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy sat quietly in a room and tried to figure out how to respond to a human. The throne asked for time. 24 hours to convene properly, to prepare their diplomatic team, to conduct whatever analysis they could manage on the Cairo in the interim. James agreed. He was cheerful about it. He said they would remain in position and asked, with what sounded like genuine courtesy, if anyone would like to come aboard for a tour. No one took him up on it. The Cairo held its position 12,000 kilometers from the station of Seven Voices, lights on, not moving, not threatening, simply present in the way that very large, very capable things are present, by the weight of what they represent rather than anything they actually do. Inside the station, the 24 hours were the most intense in recent memory. Tertiary analysts ran every scan they had against the Cairo's hull and came back with fragments, partial material composition data that didn't match any known alloy, partial internal structure imaging that showed power readings so far above standard human technology that two separate analysts submitted reports questioning whether their instruments were malfunctioning. MRN engineers were called in and confirmed. The instruments were fine. The readings were accurate. Meanwhile, Hara's team pulled every piece of data they had on James Okafor. What they found and what they hadn't found told its own story. James Okafor appeared in public human records as a theoretical physicist and systems engineer. He had published papers on propulsion theory, materials science, and computational mathematics, all in fields the Throne's analysts recognized as relevant to advanced engineering. What they had not noticed and were now noticing with the focused attention of people who had just been badly surprised, was the pattern. Every paper Okafor published publicly was slightly wrong in the same direction. Not obviously wrong, subtly, carefully wrong, in ways that would lead any reader, human or otherwise, away from the conclusions he was actually pursuing. He had been publishing deliberate misdirection for 20 years. Every paper, every public statement, every academic appearance, all of it carefully constructed to make him look like a brilliant theorist who was just a little ahead of conventional thinking, never quite as far ahead as he actually was. He was hiding his progress, Hara said to Selvath, 2 hours before the formal session was set to begin. In plain sight. Everything he published was real enough to be credible and wrong enough to be misleading. For 20 years, Selvath said. At least 20 years. Selvath was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Who else knew?" "That's the question," Hara said. "The human government records they're structured very strangely. There are layers of classification we've never encountered in human systems before. The encryption is flagged 3 years ago. We can see that something is behind it. We cannot see what. How many people? We don't know. How many ships? We don't know." Selvath stood at the window of his office and looked at the Caro. It was visible from here, a dark shape against the stars, light steady, patient. "What do we know?" he asked. Hara thought about this for a genuine moment before answering. "We know that humans are more capable than we thought. Considerably more capable. We know that they have been developing that capability in secret for at least 2 decades. We know that this ship exists and that we cannot detect it, cannot track it, and based on the power readings our instruments managed to capture, we have serious doubts about our ability to destroy it. We know that the man on that ship is the most strategically sophisticated individual we have ever encountered in a first engagement." She paused. "And we know that he is being very polite about all of this." "That worries me more than anything else," Selvath said. "Yes," Hara said. "Me too." Back on the Caro, the 24 hours were quiet. The crew rested in shifts. Rosa Delgado ran maintenance checks she didn't need to run because it gave her hands something to do. Lieutenant Chin recalibrated the navigation systems twice. Sarah Park sat in the engineering bay and read a novel she'd brought from home. Paper, actual paper, because she'd decided that if she was going to possibly make history, she was going to do it with a real book in her hands. James Okafor sat in his cabin and talked to his daughter on a secure channel. Her name was Maya. She was 27 years old and she was on colony Kepler 7, one of the 14 outer colonies currently cut off from the main supply corridor. She looked tired on the screen, not frightened because Maya Okafor had her father's ability to manage fear in her body language, but tired in the way that people who have been rationing water and food get tired, in the bones, in the eyes. "How are you?" he asked. "Same," she said. "Water recycler in Block C went down yesterday. We fixed it. Medical supply inventory is getting tight. We're managing." She looked at him steadily. "Dad, tell me it's going according to plan." "It is," he said. "Better than plan, actually." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "How much better?" "We're 12,000 kilometers from the station of 7 voices," he said. "They can see us. They know we exist. They agreed to talk." Maya's eyes went wide. Just for a moment, one unguarded second of pure raw feeling that she pulled back quickly, because she had her father's training if not his 20 years of practice. But James saw it and felt it in his chest like a fist. "They can't ignore us now," he said quietly. "Whatever happens in that session tomorrow, they cannot put us back in the box they built for us. We're too big for it now. Come home," Maya said. "When it's done. Come home." "I will," he said. "I promise." He kept his face calm until the channel closed. Then he sat alone in his cabin for a long time, looking at the photo of an 8-year-old girl pinned above his screen. He had made this ship. He had built the drive, developed the hull, designed the weapon systems, trained the crew, maintained the secret for 19 years. He had done all of it for a great many reasons. The colonies, the dignity of humanity, the future of his species in a galaxy that had decided to manage them rather than welcome them. But the truest reason, the one he returned to in the dark and quiet moments, was 8 years old in a photo and 27 in a video call, looking at him with tired eyes from a colony world that was running out of water. He went to sleep. Tomorrow the galaxy was going to change. The formal session began at 0900 station time. The throne's representatives gathered in the main diplomatic chamber. The full formal setting this time, not the command center emergency gather from the day before. Selvath had made that choice deliberately. The command center was crisis management. The diplomatic chamber was governance. He wanted the throne to look like a governing body, not a panicked one. The chamber was grand as such things went, high ceilings, the flags of 7 species, the circular table that had hosted 9 centuries of galactic decisions, the slowly rotating star map above it all. James Okafor joined by holographic projection. He was sitting in the Caro's communications room, but the projection technology made him appear to be sitting at a chair at the circular table, life-sized, clear, stable. He had combed his hair. He was wearing a jacket with the United Earth Government insignia on the lapel. Selvath called the session to order. "Dr. Okafor," he said, "you requested this session. The floor is yours." James nodded. He did not rush. He had learned, over a lifetime of working in rooms where he was either underestimated or unwelcome, that the most powerful thing you can do when finally given the floor is use it slowly. He took a breath. He looked around at the 7 representatives. Members of the Galactic Throne, he said. I want to start by saying something that I think will surprise you. I am not here to threaten you. The presence of your ship suggests otherwise, Jar said flatly. The presence of my ship, James said calmly, suggests that we could threaten you. That is different. I am here to demonstrate capability, not to exercise it. There is a significant distinction. He paused. For the past 38 years, our interactions with the throne have been structured by an assumption. The assumption that we are fundamentally limited. That we are manageable. That our needs and rights are secondary to the convenience of the throne's existing arrangements. He looked at Selvath. I am here to demonstrate that the assumption was wrong. And to ask, respectfully and in good faith, that we begin again on more accurate terms. Tharavel leaned forward slightly. And if we choose not to? Then we go home, James said simply. We continue developing. We continue building. And we come back in another 10 years with more ships and a longer list of things we'd like to discuss. He said it without menace. That was the part that unsettled them most, James knew, not the content but the tone. The absolute, grounded certainty of a man who had done his math. I would rather we settle this now. I think you would too. A silence. Tesheri Representative Nis spoke next, her voice precise and quiet. You mentioned terms. What specifically are you asking for? James had a document. He'd prepared it over the course of 2 years, refined it over 23 drafts, had it reviewed by every significant political and legal mind in the United Earth government who was clear to know about Project Caro. He presented it now, a 40-point framework delivered clearly without rushing, covering the reopening of outer colony supply corridors, the renegotiation of all trade agreements with a neutral arbiter rather than throne internal review, the reclassification of humanity to Class II status with full voting observer rights in throne sessions, the provision of complete navigation data for the Orion Arm and Kepler Belt, and the establishment of a joint Human Throne Commission to review all technology sharing restrictions from the previous 3 decades. He presented it in 45 minutes, systematically, answering clarifying questions as they arose. The 7 representatives listened. That, in itself, was something. 900 years of galactic governance and the throne had never once truly listened to a Class 4 species. They had received petitions, processed complaints, acknowledged transmissions, issued rulings. They had never sat in a formal session and genuinely listened. But they were listening now. When James finished, Kythets asked, crackling but not aggressively, the outer colony corridors. You say they were closed without negotiation. Our position is that the navigation restrictions were issued under Standard Resource Protection Protocol. Your position, James said, is not supported by the resource data. The Kepler Belt corridor passes through a region with documented negligible resource density. It was not closed to protect resources. It was closed because the throne preferred our colonies to be dependent on throne-controlled supply chains. He met the MRNN representative's flickering gaze. I have the resource surveys. I have your own internal assessments from 14 years ago recommending against the restrictions on resource grounds. Someone overruled those assessments for reasons that were never made public. The Oran representative, elderly, quiet, who had not spoken until this moment, said very softly, that is accurate. Everyone looked at the Oran. They always looked at the Oran when the Oran spoke, because the Oran remembered everything and never said anything they weren't certain of. The resource justification, the Oran continued, was applied retroactively. The decision to restrict the corridor was made 18 months before the resource assessment was conducted. Pause. The assessment was then adjusted to match the decision. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from the ones before it. This was the silence of things that had been hidden, finding the air and light. James said nothing. He had known this for years. He had the documentation. He had not led with it because he wanted the session to be constructive rather than accusatory. But he had been prepared to use it if necessary. He had not expected the Oran to use it for him. Selvath's expression was completely, absolutely neutral in a way that told James the Arbiter was working very hard to keep it that way. We will need to review the documentation, Selvath said. All of it. Of course, James said. I will transmit our full archive. The session will recess for 6 hours, Selvath said. We will resume this afternoon. The session recessed. The holographic projection of James Okafor dissolved. In the Caro's communications room, James sat back in his chair and let out a long, slow breath. Sarah Park put her head in the door. How'd it go? The Oran backed us up, James said. Sarah stared at him. The Oran backed us up? Yes. The Oran never back anyone up. I know. James? I know, he said again. He was starting to smile. It was a real smile this time, not a tired one. I know. During the 6-hour recess, Selvath called for a private meeting with Orin representative Elder Yeth. Elder Yeth was the oldest Orin in the known galaxy at the time of the session, 312 years old, which for an Orin was simply middle age. The Orin were small, barely a meter tall, with large dark eyes, soft gray-white skin, and the kind of stillness that came from a species that had evolved in deep underground cavern systems where silence was survival. They did not seek power. They did not accumulate territory. They had joined the Galactic throne not for influence, but because the throne was the largest repository of events in the galaxy's history, and the Orin wanted access to that history the way other species wanted access to resources. They remembered everything. Not metaphorically, literally. Orin neurology was built for total recall. Every Orin alive had complete access to every memory they had ever formed, and through a complex cultural practice of shared memory transfer, they maintained a partial collective access to the memories of Orin who came before them going back over 4,000 years. Elder Yeth remembered the original corridor restriction decision. She had been present. She had been young then, barely 60, and new to the throne session chamber, sitting in the junior observer position behind the full representative, taking everything in with the quiet attention of someone who understood from birth that what she remembered might one day matter. She had remembered it for 252 years. Elder Yeth, Selvath said when they were alone in his office. Why? Yeth looked at him with large, dark, perfectly calm eyes. Because it was true, she said. The restriction was not justified by the resource data. You know this, Arbiter. You have known it for some time. That was a session with a species that has demonstrated they know the truth and can document it, Yeth said, cutting him off gently but absolutely. Arbiter. I have sat in that chamber for 252 years. I have watched the throne manage, manipulate, and minimize 311 species. I have watched trade agreements structured to create dependency. I have watched classification systems used to justify exclusion. I have remembered all of it because that is what I am. Her voice remained perfectly even. Humanity was not the first species to be treated this way, but they may be the first to force the question of whether that treatment was right. Selvath was quiet for a moment. You are saying it was not. I am saying, Yeth replied, that the throne was built to bring peace to the galaxy. 900 years ago, the founders of this body chose 7 species to govern together because they believed that diverse power, held in balance, was more stable than any single empire. They were right. But somewhere in the centuries between then and now, governance became management, and management became control. She folded her small hands in her lap. Dr. Okafor did not arrive today to threaten us. He arrived to demonstrate what happens when a species is managed rather than welcomed. Given time and necessity and an understanding that no one was coming to help them, they helped themselves. And we were supposed to welcome that? Selvath said, a thread of something genuine in his voice, not anger but something older. Something that might have been regret. We were supposed to recognize that they were people, Yeth said. Not pieces on a board. She stood. She was barely a meter tall and she made Selvath feel, somehow, that he was the smaller presence in the room. I will continue to speak truthfully in the afternoon session, Arbiter, as I have always done. I hope the throne will continue to listen. She left. Selvath stood at his window and looked at the Caro for a long time. On the Caro, James was not resting. He was in the communications room with Sarah and Captain Torres and Lieutenant Commander Park, going through the afternoon session preparation with the same systematic attention he'd given to every step of this mission. Contingency by contingency. What if Jar pushed for a military response? What if Kaithets demanded the drive technology as a precondition for negotiation? What if Tharavel tried to reframe the discussion as a human violation of throne regulations rather than a throne violation of human rights? They worked through all of it. At some point Torres said, James? Can I ask you something off mission for a second? Go ahead. Were you scared? She said it neutrally, curiously. When we came out of fold space this morning. When we just appeared. Were you scared? James thought about this honestly. Yes, he said. For about 30 seconds. Then Rosa called out hull integrity nominal and the lights came on and I thought, we actually did it. After 19 years we actually did it. He looked at his hands. After that I wasn't scared anymore. I don't know the right word for it. Ready? Sarah said. Ready? James agreed. Yes, that's exactly it. Torres nodded slowly. Me too, she said. 30 seconds of absolute terror and then, ready. She looked out the window at the station. Do you think they'll agree? To the core items? James said. Yes. Not immediately. There'll be months of follow-up sessions, subcommittees, documentation reviews. But yes. They'll agree. Because the alternative is a galaxy where they have to account for ships they cannot see, built by a species they cannot predict, operating on principles they never took seriously. He paused. We didn't need to be the best military power in the galaxy. We just needed to be more complicated than they planned for. Rosa's voice came over the intercom. Captain? You're going to want to see something. Torres touched her earpiece. What is it, Rosa? We're picking up incoming signals. From 3 different directions. Pause. They're human transponder codes, Captain. They're ours. Torres and James looked at each other. Who? Torres said. Working on it, Rosa said. Stand by. A longer pause. Captain. It's the UES Anchor, the UES Relentless, and the UES Providence. The Caro's bridge had gone very quiet. James smiled. It was the most genuine smile he had produced in 19 years. General Hale, he said to no one in particular, you beautiful, punctual man. Torres looked at him. You knew. I suspected, he said. Hale told me Caro wasn't the only project. He didn't tell me the details. I thought, he shook his head. I thought maybe 1 more ship. Maybe 2. 3, Torres said. 3, James confirmed. Outside, through the Caro's hull cameras, 3 new shapes were emerging from fold space. Different profiles from the Caro, different designs, but unmistakably, undeniably human. Unmistakably, undeniably capable. For ships now. 4 invisible, impossible ships, sitting in the space outside the station of 7 voices with their lights on. James, Torres said very quietly. They're going to see this. Yes, he said. They are. The afternoon session lasted 9 hours. It was the longest continuous diplomatic session in Throne history. It broke the previous record, set during the Third Solvith integration crisis of 634 years ago, by 2 hours and 17 minutes. By the end, 3 of the 7 representatives had consumed more than their body weight in various sustaining beverages, 2 tertiary support staff members had been quietly sent to the medical bay with stress-related conditions, and sensor analyst Venari, still on shift in the monitoring room, had been awake for 31 continuous hours and was surviving on willpower and the awareness that she was watching history. James Okafor, across the holographic link, looked exactly the same at the end as he had at the beginning. This, more than anything else about him, had deeply unsettled Jar, who had lived among powerful beings for a long time and understood that the ability to remain steady under pressure was itself a form of power. The session covered ground that the morning session had only approached. The outer colony corridors. James presented a 30-year timeline of communications, survey data, and Throne internal assessments, including the falsified resource justification that the Orin had already confirmed. The Throne could not credibly contest it. Selvath accepted the framework for reopening the corridors subject to a joint review commission, with human representatives holding equal standing to Throne members on the commission. The trade agreements. James presented economic analysis showing that every major trade agreement between humanity and the Throne over 38 years had been structured with embedded clauses that capped human industrial output at levels that kept them dependent on Throne supply chains for specific categories of technology and material. This was, to put it mildly, not what the Throne had publicly characterized the agreements as. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Then Kaithats, to general surprise, said that the MRNN had concerns about some of these agreements that predated the human question and that a full review would be appropriate. Selvath agreed. The classification, this was the most contested point. Jar argued against reclassification with considerable force, not without logic. A Class II species had full observation rights in Throne sessions. They received unredacted navigation data. They had formal consultation rights on decisions affecting their territory. Raising humanity to Class II was not a small step. It was, as Jar put it, the kind of change that tells every Class 3 and 4 species in the galaxy that building a secret warship fleet is how you move up in this organization. James conceded the point was fair. He said, then perhaps the solution is to build an organization where secret warship fleets are not necessary. I would genuinely prefer that. He got something close to a laugh from the Ravel. Which, given everything, was extraordinary. By hour 7, a framework agreement was on the table. Not a final treaty, those would take months, but a signed framework. Both parties agreeing to a ceasefire of the existing tensions, the formal word for ending the corridor restrictions, a joint commission structure for trade review, a provisional upgrade to Class II observation status for humanity, and a new set of diplomatic protocols that actually treated human representatives as peers rather than petitioners. James looked at the framework on his screen. He thought about 19 years of work. He thought about the engineers and scientists and soldiers who had given years of their lives to project Caro in rooms that didn't officially exist, working on problems that officially weren't being solved. He thought about 40,000 people on outer colony worlds counting supplies and fixing water recyclers and waiting. He thought about Maya. Arbiter Selvath, he said. Dr. Okafor. On behalf of the United Earth government and the people of the outer colonies, I accept this framework. Selvath looked at him for a long moment. Whatever the Arbiter was feeling, he kept it private. But he nodded, a real nod with weight behind it. Then we begin, he said. The framework was signed at 2317 station time. And somewhere in the monitoring room, sensor analyst Venerai, who had been awake for 33 hours and would sleep for 12 after this, allowed herself one very quiet, very private sound of astonishment. The afternoon session had not yet formally reconvened when the station's sensor array went off for the second time in 24 hours. Venerai, still on shift, running on stimulant beverages and the particular heightened alertness that comes from living through one of the most significant days of your career, was the one who caught it. 3 new gravimetric flickers almost simultaneous from 3 different directions. Then 3 new contacts materializing in the visual field, different from the Caro in shape but identical in the quality of their appearance. No approach. No warning. No signature. Just there. Then not there. Then there. She didn't file a low-priority anomaly report this time. She hit the emergency alert without a second's hesitation and then sat back in her chair and thought, very calmly, we are dealing with something we are not equipped to deal with. In the session chamber, the 7 representatives were receiving the same data feed simultaneously. The images came up on the rotating star display above the circular table. 4 contacts now, positioned at what a tactical analyst could immediately recognize as the 4 points of a diamond formation around the station. Not a siege. Not a blockade. Something more considered than either of those things. A demonstration of positioning. A way of showing, without a single weapon being activated, that the station could be surrounded. Jar stood up. This is an act of war, he said flatly. Sit down, Jar, Selvath said. Arbiter. Sit. Down. The command was quiet and absolute. Jar sat. No weapons have been deployed. No threat has been made. We are going to reopen the session and we are going to ask Dr. Okafor to explain what we are seeing. He looked at the communications officer. Reopen the channel. James Okafor's holographic figure reappeared at the table. Selvath looked at him steadily. Explain. Those are 3 other ships, James said. United Earth ships Anchor, Relentless, and Providence. They are here at the request of the United Earth government and in support of this diplomatic session. He paused. They are not here to threaten anyone. They are here because we wanted you to understand that the Caro is not an isolated project. We wanted you to understand that what you see is not the limit of what exists. The room was very, very quiet. How many? Miss asked. Precise. Direct. James looked at her. Enough, he said. Miss sat back. Dr. Okafor, Tharavel said, and her copper-colored eyes were doing something James hadn't seen in any of his briefing materials on the Kilari. They were calculating rapidly in the open, with nothing hidden behind the usual diplomatic smoothness. You understand what you are doing here. You understand what this represents. Yes, James said. You are changing everything. We are, he said. Yes, we are. He looked around the table, at Selvath, at Yeth, at Jar, at Kaithats, at all of them. But we are changing it by talking. In a session chamber. Through a diplomatic channel. We are not changing it with weapons fire or threats or ultimatums. He paused. We could have done this differently. We chose not to. I hope that tells you something about the kind of neighbors we would like to be. The silence after that was the longest one yet. And then Elder Yeth said quietly, it does. The UES Caro departed the station of 7 Voices 2 days after the framework was signed, falling back into fold space with the same quiet invisibility with which she had arrived. She did not go home immediately. James had one stop to make first. Colony Kepler 7 was 14 hours from the station at folded drive speed. A journey that, in a conventional human ship using phase displacement, would have taken 11 days. The Caro came out of fold space in the Kepler system quietly with no announcement, and established orbit around the colony's planet at a low altitude that put her clearly visible in the colony's sky. Torres had asked if that was a good idea. They're going to see us, she said. That's the point, James replied. The colony's communications center lit up within minutes. The planetary administrator, a woman named Patricia Marsh, 53, originally from Birmingham, Alabama, who had been running Kepler-7 for 9 years through increasingly difficult conditions with a particular combination of competence and stubbornness that colony administrators seemed to grow as a survival trait, came on the comm channel with a voice that was doing its best to be professional and not entirely succeeding. "This is Kepler-7 Colony Administration," she said. "We are reading a vessel in orbit, please identify." "This is United Earth Ship Caro," Torres said. "Administrator Marsh. We've got some good news." Pause. "Go ahead, Caro." "The Galactic Throne has agreed to reopen the outer colony supply corridors, effective immediately, pending formal commission review of the terms. The corridor to Kepler-7 will be operational within 72 hours. Torres let that sit for a moment. "Additionally, we have," she glanced at James, who nodded, "approximately 40 metric tons of emergency supplies on board. Medical, water filtration components, protein provisions. We were hoping you might have somewhere to put them." The silence from the colony comm center lasted long enough that Torres briefly wondered if the channel had dropped. Then Patricia Marsh said, in a voice that was no longer doing its best to be professional, "We have plenty of room." It took 3 days to offload the supplies using the colony's transport shuttles. James spent much of that time on the surface. He had beamed down the day after orbital arrival. Torres had gone with him and Sarah and Lieutenant Chen because all of them had family on colony worlds and this was close enough to count, and he walked through the colony's main settlement with the specific attention of a man who had been thinking about this place for years and was finally seeing it with his own eyes. It was harder than he'd expected. Not because it was desperate. The colonists had held things together better than anyone had a right to expect. But because it was ordinary. Children going to school in buildings that needed repairs. Medical staff doing their jobs with equipment that was 2 generations out of date. Farmers managing hydroponics bays that were slightly too small for the population they were feeding. Ordinary people managing extraordinarily difficult circumstances with dignity and pragmatism and a particular kind of quiet stubbornness that James recognized because he had grown up around it, grown up made of it. He found Maya on the second day. She was working a shift at the colony's water management facility, because she was his daughter and doing the hard practical work was what they did. She saw him through the facility window and stopped what she was doing and just stood there for a moment. He went inside. They didn't say much. There wasn't much to say. He put his arms around her and she put her forehead against his shoulder and they stood there in the hum of water recycling machinery for a while. "Is it done?" she asked finally. "It started," he said. "That's enough for now." She pulled back and looked at him. She looked tired, yes, still tired, the bone-deep kind. But there was something else there now. Something he hadn't seen in her eyes in years. Something that sat in the chest and had edges, that was harder than hope. "Good," she said. "That's enough." Back on Earth, General Marcus Hale watched the data feeds from his office in Colorado Springs. The outer colony corridor reopening was announced to the public 3 days after the framework signing. It was the most carefully worded announcement the United Earth government had ever produced, acknowledging the diplomatic breakthrough, framing it as a successful negotiation rather than a confrontation, making no mention of the Caro or its sister ships, simply stating that an agreement had been reached and that supply corridors would reopen immediately. It took 6 hours for the leaks to start. Someone, never identified, though Hale had his suspicions, sent an anonymized data packet to 7 different news outlets simultaneously. The packet contained the visual feed from the station of 7 Voices monitoring system showing the Caro's appearance. It showed the ship materializing out of nothing, lights on, calm. It showed the readings from the throne's sensors, the flat lines where a signature should have been, the pure blank absence of any detectable approach. It showed a ship that should not have existed sitting 12,000 kilometers from the center of galactic power with its running lights on. The reaction on Earth was immediate and extraordinary. Not panic. Not fear. Something else. Something that doesn't have a precise word in any language but that you recognize immediately when you see it in a crowd. The sense of a people discovering they are not as small as they'd been told. The particular, electric feeling of a species finding out that someone had been carrying something forward for them, in secret, in the dark, for 19 years. Hale watched the feeds from cities across the planet. He watched people gathering in public spaces, looking at their phones, at screens, at each other. He watched the particular expression that was spreading across millions of faces. Not triumph exactly, not relief exactly, but something in between. Something that had been waiting a long time. He poured himself a drink, something old and Scottish, kept in a drawer for occasions that warranted it, and raised it to the window. "You did it, James," he said to no one. "You absolute magnificent lunatic. You actually did it."